Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the show. On this episode, I'm exploring how we can build communities, not in the physical sense, though what you're going to hear could help with that, but in the networking collaboration sense of the word. My guest, Danielle Letayf, is one of those people that has energy, enthusiasm, and a brain that comes up with lots of creative ideas. And unlike many of us, Danielle actually tries to put those ideas into practice. She's a community builder that seeks to bring like-minded people together. And when I say like-minded, I don't mean that they all share the same views. I mean that they share similar values. Danielle's a big proponent of harnessing the power of cognitive diversity to make incredible things happen. She's the founder of Badassery, a membership community designed for unconventional thought leaders dedicated to igniting change. As you'll hear, I'm a member, which is how I met Danielle. And in our discussion, she shares her insights on the importance of community building, storytelling, and the power of cognitive diversity. Danielle talks about amplifying underrepresented voices, creating spaces that foster genuine connection, and the role of values in building a strong, cohesive community. We also explore her personal journey from her roots as the daughter of immigrant parents to a mission-driven career in technology and media. I love getting inspirational people onto the show, and Danielle is absolutely one of those. So please enjoy, as I know you will, my discussion with Danielle Letayf on the art of community building. Danielle, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Thanks for having me, Christian.
I'm really excited to have you here, and we'll talk a little bit about how we met. But to kick us off, can you tell my listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yes. I never know where to start. It's sort of like, do I start from like baby Danielle or current Danielle? But I guess, it's all I'll start in the past maybe few years. So my name is Danielle Letayf. I am the founder of Badassery, which is a membership community for unconventional thought leaders dedicated to igniting change. So basically, our core mission is to amplify as many stories as possible, especially with those who are underheard or overlooked. That's kind of always been my passion point, is really understanding the power of stories and who should be amplified. And so what that means, without all the marketing jargon, is that we essentially help people elevate their stories through community, resources, and tangible speaking opportunities, where we match them with really awesome stages all over the world. Outside of Badassery, my career has always been in community building, communities, events, getting people from point A to B, and generally loving the work that I've done in the tech and media space. Besides that, what else is there, Danielle? I really love dancing. I love a lot of gold things. So I'm like, Christian can see this, but rocking a lot of gold, whether it's real or not, it's, we'll never tell you. But, and then outside of that as well, a big part of my identity, I would say, is being raised to immigrant parents from the Middle East. So that's kind of, I think, influenced a lot of the work that I have done and my understanding of community and hospitality, and what it just means to be a good, honest human and business person.
And I think one of the things that, and obviously you've done the bit about how we met, which is I heard about Badassery. It was like, I really want to join that because it's just like, it's a super interesting idea. And the bit I loved was that you've set something up where you have to go, there's a process to join.
Yeah.
There's a kind of, and you have to record videos. Because you're saying, okay, I really want to make sure that this isn't just sort of pay your way to come into the club. This is very much around, are you the right kind of person to fit in? And so of all the things I think I've joined in recent years, it's the one that I won't say terrified me, because it really shouldn't, because I'm used to doing videos and stuff.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, right, you were literally like, we want to see, you got to do videos to join this thing because we really want to see you and understand who you are and what makes you tick. And I thought that almost, the effort involved kind of partly almost put me off, but I thought that's really cool, right? Because this is about join a community and you've got to be playing a part in it.
Yeah, 100%. It's something that we've actually kept throughout the whole tenure of Badassery, the past 5 years. I think one of my biggest qualms with community, and I've been in the space probably now for 10 years, is that oftentimes communities have prioritized scale over depth. So sort of like breadth over depth. And over my time, I've joined many communities, I've run many communities. And what I found to be the most impactful, the most interesting, is actually figuring out what makes a community tick as a family, as a whole, right? And to me, understanding the whole really requires understanding the individual person and what they can bring. And I think you've probably noticed this, Christian, maybe as you are interested in original storytelling and originality of thought. I'm not really interested in truthfully being surrounding my members with people who kind of are part of the status quo all the time. We have that on social media. You can go on Twitter. You can read the same types of ideas all the time. What I'm interested in is maybe common topics, that's fine, but with an interesting twist. To me, that actually is someone, and we as a team have gone through defining what it means to be a badass and how do we actually quantify that. So we have a scoring system. We have all these things on the back end that actually makes this fair. But we kind of identified the 5 different assets to us that makes our specific community tick and feel more like it has balance, right? We're not looking for 100 marketers who talk about SEO. We're not, we're trying to look for people who have balance and who have interesting thoughts and will push back. I love agreeing, but I hate agreeing at the same time. And I found a lot of communities that bring in like-minded people will often be like, good, I love this idea. Tell me more. I'm like, I want people to like argue. I want people to argue, come in, say their piece, say, I totally disagree. And here's why. Argue with respect, right? And I think when we talk about this piece of sort of like diversity, everyone kind of thinks like religion, race, whatever it is. To me, it's like, okay, can someone who grew up 2 towns over from me or 20 states over from me actually show me their world in a way that I would never see from behind my computer, in Boston? So I'm glad, I'm not glad that made you a little scared, but I'm glad it kind of intrigued you because we do take that quite seriously in how we curate.
What you've just talked about there is what I would call cognitive diversity, right? So this is,
Yeah.
of course, we get to that point by having people with different backgrounds, and that means different ethnicities and different life stories.
Yeah.
But it also means you want that sort of level of disruptive thinking. And I think one of the things that's interesting about the connection between tech and this is tech's really good at building bubbles and echo chambers and hang out with your tribe. And you've kind of gone against that. And so I love the idea that what you're building is on the one hand, it's a community. So it is combining people.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it is deliberately, you've got tension built into the model. And that's really important.
That's true, but it's interesting because we focus on values. This is something my team and I always talk about. To me, it's like if you are connected by values, you are connected. Whatever you say, think, do, obviously saying, thinking, and doing, those are part of your values. But I think many people possess the core same, they can possess the same values and express them differently. And to me, that's when there's something that works because you've identified, for example, the value of generosity. Right. You and I could both be generous, but you think completely differently than I do. But at the end of the day, I know you're going to come back and give something to the community and also take something like in a very thoughtful way. So I think it does, to your point about cognitive diversity, I'm curious to actually hear if that includes values for you, because to me, our foundation is how are we assessing values based on responses and questions and all that kind of stuff. Because they're a little bit different for me.
And I think that's a great challenge because I do think the diversity piece only works if there is something that keeps you in common.
Yes.
Right? Because otherwise you're just going to end up having, and we've all been in situations, right, where there's pointless arguments and we sit, politics, it presents us with lots of examples of people just fighting their corner. And so I think you're right. You do need to have that common baseline. So I'd never thought about that, but it is interesting. So for the diversity to work, you need commonality. Otherwise it just becomes a never ending battle.
Yeah, definitely. And then it becomes almost a selfishness, I find. To your point about battling, it's sort of like everyone's talking but nobody's listening. So it's sort of the commonality of values and commonality of goal. To me, those are the two, kind of like what's inside and what's outside. Those 2 points have to be similar. Everything else in between, I'm like, cool, go for it, hash it out. But I think if there's alignment on that front, it creates a lot of beautiful things.
I just love this idea that you kind of go, okay, well, we're just going to amplify some voices here. And it strikes me, looking back on your career, you're always up for big challenges.
Oh, yeah.
It seems to me.
Oh, yeah.
And I just wondered what drives that, because you clearly, like the challenges you set yourself, these are not small things, right? You're like, I don't quite want to go and say you're going to change the world, but you have got this sort of dreams along those lines, right? You wouldn't be deterred by the scale of affecting big change. And I just wonder what that was, because there's loads of people out there that sort of, I'd love the world to be nicer or this to happen or that to happen, but they lack that kind of, I don't know, you need a certain amount of motivation and a willingness to do that.
Yeah.
And I wonder what gave you that.
I don't know. That's a good question. I think I never really think about the next step that I'm going to do. I'm never thinking this is going to change the world. I just think this problem bothers me so much that I have to fix it. It's just sort of this obsession and sort of a fun challenge. I've never really thrived in the traditional environments. I've worked in corporate, I've been in classrooms, I've done all those kinds of things. And I just need to learn by doing, as you know. And so I think for me, it's kind of like if I feel very passionately about a problem, which is most problems I have solved in my career. For example, I was on the founding team of an organization called Built by Girls, where we work to get teen girls involved in tech careers. So that was owned by AOL and then by Verizon Media. And to me, did I imagine this would be sort of this like nationwide sweep takeover of programs and Michelle Obama collaboration? No, I didn't imagine that. But what I thought to myself is, how can I had the problem set, which is how do we get more girls to be in tech careers? I'm not a technical person, but what I thought was, how do I get in the head of a teen girl and think, how do I redefine what it means to be in technology? Does it mean, it's sort of this traditional mentality of like someone in their basement with the hoodie eating chips and typing away? That's actually not what technology means. My whole career has been in tech and I'm not technical. So for me, it was the most fun thing to sort of start slowly putting on events that was like the tech of fashion, the tech of Broadway, the tech of music. And we started to do collaborations with Spotify and then actually Broadway and then Refinery 29. So things started building. And I think for me, what's interesting is it's sort of like, and you're a founder as well, this sort of addicting feeling of like, oh, this thing is working. This seed that I'm doing is working. How do I plant another one? How do I plant another one? So, the example I just mentioned, like the tech of blah, blah, blah. So it started as one event in collaboration with Spotify, and then it became a nationwide event that happened across different tech companies that were sponsored by them, because it just ended up working. So it's kind of just like listening and building and iterating on that. But I think the root of it is always just that I feel passionately about problems that I solve. And if I don't, I cannot do anything. I can't motivate myself, to start a lawn mowing company, which is a very, very incredible, a very lucrative type of company. But because I don't see sort of the connections of how I can create change or fix or do all that kind of stuff, I don't really, it's not for me. So I'm not sure where this sort of like mission driven piece came, to be honest with you. I think part of it has always just seen my parents having to figure it out as immigrants here. A big piece of it is sort of like there almost has never been a choice to just sit back and be like, let me just ride the easy route. It's kind of like you keep moving, you keep changing, you keep building. I've always just seen that growing up. So I was like, I guess that's what I'll do.
And I really love this idea of passion driving you. And it's
Yeah.
not just passion, it's almost irritation, right?
Yeah.
And this is the bit I think where you and I have in common is I look at certain things, I go, why is it like that? Right? This makes no sense.
Yes.
And kind of this is unacceptable. And it might be that for me, it's the dumbest of things.
Yes. Yeah.
Like there's battles I don't need to fight and stuff that you just kind of go, why? Like, why is that the bit that's grabbed me? And I contrast that with loads of people I see, and this, right, quite often in the tech space as well. It's like, let's identify an opportunity that I don't massively care about or whisper it understand.
Right.
And I'll go and get some funding for that because that's fundable. And then I will go do that. And there isn't the passion behind the project. It's just kind of like we're doing it because we can and we've recognized.
Yeah.
So it's almost driven by the investment case.
Yeah.
What you're talking about is driven by something really visceral.
Yeah.
And it's like, I just can't let this pass and I've got to somehow find a way to do this, which of course often is not necessarily immediately investable, right? You're playing with a dynamic and often there may be vested interest in this not changing, right? Because the world's not, back to your point around people who want the easy path. And so I'm always fascinated when I hear people talk in the terms that you do, because you're not a sort of, I'm in this for the money. Clearly you want it, you're ambitious, all those sorts of things, obviously, but the driving force is just that visceral reaction. And that, on the one hand, right, it gives you motivation to do it. On the other hand, it's really hard.
It's really hard. And it's a trait that I sometimes wish I didn't own. I don't know if you feel like this, Christian, but sometimes like I wish I could just work 9 to 5 at a really stable company, make the 6 figures that I know, would come into my pocket, fit not easily, but in a stable way. So it's sort of like this thing in me. And I'm curious to hear if you have it too, where it's like it's always speaking to me. I'm like, it's always pushing me. And I think it's also just because I enjoy challenging myself to think differently. It's kind of like there's always things to solve for. And when I solve for it in a way that even surprises myself, that also becomes an addicting factor. That's like, oh, cool. I didn't know I could do that, Yeah. I'm sure you feel the same, right?
Yeah, that it totally resonates.
Yeah.
And I think I couldn't do what I do now if there wasn't something, and I'll use the term slightly sort of derogatory, slightly weird.
Yeah.
Probably in every sense of the word, as to something somewhere in my system has flipped. And I find myself unable to not look at the world through that lens. So in my case, it's like looking around against dumb rules that we see everywhere. And I'm like, why is this here? Who are these people telling me what to do? What is that all about? Why have they done it this way? What's happening? And to the extent that, I was joking with my partner the other day. I was walking down the street and I just stopped to take a picture of a sign, which is just weird. Nothing, not like an artistically amazing sign, just a weird thing. And I can't even tell you why.
Right.
And I've got my iPhone photo library is just full of pictures that I will one day be able to explain, but I can't right now. There's just
Right.
something that's and she's just kind of walking off going, he's doing his thing. And I'm like, I thank
Right.
God I'm with someone that
Yeah. She's like,
understands
oh,
that.
that again. Yeah.
Because because he's just doing his thing, right? It's not even weird. And I kind of, I don't know. I think you're right. You need that motivation and you need that something to keep you going,
Yeah.
because the normal bits of what I think is interesting about your comment about the money and everything else is those conventional structures that you said you didn't do so well in. They do give you a lot of feedback points that can keep you in the
Yeah.
game.
Yeah.
And that might be your monthly
Yeah.
paycheck. That might be some sort of fancy title. That might be just, I don't know, I have a sense of purpose, right? Because I go to an office and maybe it's I'm being told what to do.
Mm.
And you strip all those things away and you kind of need that intrinsic motivation to keep going.
Yeah. That's definitely true. Right. Yeah. It's kind of like the shiny things seem really great at first. And then once you think about it, to your point, sort of like, is this actually true to who I am and what I want to do? Sometimes, yes, I think. And also sometimes people actually are fine with that. That is what they want to do, is sort of create a change within their organization for a larger organization. That's just not who I am, or I think who you are. But always top of my mind, thinking the kind of like, where did that piece come from for me? And I think for many founders.
And I'm curious, I mean, you talked about you've moved around to various things and tried different constructs. Is this a sort of life existence where it's like, I'll try this and see if this is my tribe or my structure, and then move on to the next thing? Is that how that was for you?
You mean business wise?
Yeah.
I think throughout my career, so there's sort of like my pre-Badassery career and my current Badassery career, which actually now are almost equal in time, about 6 years. So my pre-Badassery career was sort of like, I never really had an idea of what I wanted to do, but when something felt right, I promised myself that I would make the leap. I think that is the kind of control and parameters I gave myself, because I wasn't sure what I wanted. So I just would always tell myself, it's okay that you don't know, but if it feels right for any reason, you have to take the chance. And so sort of like by that series of events and decision making, I ended up in really interesting, and also, we'll use your word, weird places at the same time. But I think when I'm in the weird is when I'm thriving the most, where I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And then you're surrounded by other weird people, or other people who are trying to solve and trying to move and doing all those types of things. So I think as it relates to my Badassery career, what's been really interesting as a business owner is having to move a lot with the way that my business has moved, and the industry and competition. Those are things I never had to do in my corporate career, right? And I think the space that we're in, which, it's public speaking and community and, revamping all of those structures, has changed a lot, especially over COVID. So I think quite similarly, what I've had to do is always tell myself, okay, if it feels right, paired with obviously the data, then keep moving in that direction, keep stripping back or keep adding or whatever it is. And we've had to make a lot of changes. When I started this company, I actually wanted to build a tech product. I wanted to build a marketplace for event organizers to book public speakers, because I was convinced, I was going to build the next Airbnb of PR, sort of, all these kinds of things. And then when you realize it's not what people want, maybe what you want is not what people want, and the industry's changing and all this kind of stuff, you really have to shift and shimmy. And so I do think that kind of like shifting and shimmying has been the constant in my whole life, is just being really flexible has gotten me to the next step.
I mean, it's really interesting because it's kind of tech logic applied to a human, right? The tech logic of pivoting, and and there's all these countless stories of tech things that start as one thing and then become something else. But you've talked that it's almost like that's what's driven you. So I can, because the more you talk, the more I'm like, how did she end up in the tech industry? But I kind of see that because I think your personal agility and flexibility around this seem to me to be matched to that industry's approach. So there is a little bit of a match there. But ultimately, you're not somebody I try to describe as a sort of traditional coder or kind of tech person, because you're much more on the human side of it. And I know all the minority of coders that listen to the show are going to rail with me. But you see what I'm saying? It's interesting because on the one hand, that industry doesn't strike me as being the sort of place I would expect to find you given the description. But it does make perfect sense in terms of the looking for fluidity and explanations and wanting to solve problems. And that side of it certainly seems to me to make sense.
Well, how are you defining tech industry?
That's a great question. I guess for me, tech industry is always there needs. So either there will be a hardware or a software product, and maybe it's a combination of both, that will, I hesitate to say solve a particular problem, because I think some of them don't Some of them don't.
Well, maybe they want to.
They're the opposite, right? They create problems, I think, in many cases. So I hesitate to say that to solve problems, but that's sort of how I look at it and go, at some point, there will be some techie people either making something physical with some software, I guess some software to go with it, or they'll be doing coding and there'll be some sort of digital product at the end of it. That's for me what I see as tech.
Right. Well, okay, those are technical people to me. I'm not a technical person, although I would say I'm product minded, especially after running this business. The tech industry to me, sort of similar to what I had preached to the girls that I used to work with, is sort of like, for example, Spotify is a tech company, one of the largest in the world, right? But they have people who are on the marketing team, they have design, they have, and so for me, actually, tech is almost like a catch-all. It was the place where I could play the most, because when I started, I just took the first job that I could find out of college, and that happened to be a startup in New York City. And so that startup, I intentionally have always taken roles that were kind of my playground always. So startups to me kind of had that like ping pong vibe, like wall art, all of the traditional sort of Silicon Valley TV show episodes. That was my first job. And then I think just from there, you can really grow into whatever role that you wanted, and especially product wise. So for example, I'm like very passionate about meditation, mental health. So I was able to jump over to a mental health app and run community there. I really love fashion. So one of my first internships was also around this woman who was building a product that was a shoe that, had all of these engineering materials and patents and all of it around it. And I was like, I'll do the PR, so there's a lot of ways to fit in. But I think the concept for me is that, to your point, the tech industry likes to change. They like to change. I think they change faster than they actually do. But I like the mentality. I like the mentality of moving fast, building something. I do think tech products are a vehicle to really huge change. Or to your point, yes, of course, can it be blockers? Can it be all these things? Definitely. But when done right, it can solve problems at scale. And that's the piece to me that was interesting, especially in starting my business.
I love this idea of going into roles with not necessarily a clear mind of exactly what you'll get out of it, but you're looking at it going, this is a place where I can develop, right? And I'm gonna learn some things. And what I think is really interesting about that is, on the one hand, that sounds quite unconventional. If you look back traditional career paths, like go and be an accountant or an architect or a doctor or whatever, right? Those things, it's the same dynamic. It's just that those come with some sort of formal qualification, some tedious exams, and a lot of commitment to one particular path.
Yeah.
But you're deploying the same logic, right? Which is, you're going, this will be an interesting learning opportunity, and you want to develop yourself. And I love that kind of, I just went over here because that sounded interesting.
Yeah.
And when people normally talk about careers, there's always this, well, obviously I started out and then I did this and then I did that. And there's a sort of logical flow that we're required to give.
Right.
But what you talk about is just kind of like opportunist. And I mean that in a really positive sense of like, well, I'm just going to surf this wave, grab this thing because this speaks to me at this point in time.
Yeah.
Until I guess it doesn't, right? And then we find something else that speaks to us. And that's incredibly natural.
Yeah.
But it's incredibly conventional in the sense of you're looking for experiences to develop, but incredibly unconventional in the sense of it's not carefully mapped out. So I guess it's the sort of one where if you were talking to, growing up, it's the sort of advice your parents wouldn't give you, which is go and do something sensible, right?
Right.
But I think you were doing something sensible. It's just
Right.
you were approaching it in a less formal structure.
Right. Right. Definitely. Yeah. I mean, and even my parents, for example, I wanted to study psychology in university. My parents were like, no, that's, no harm, no harm to people who study them. They're like, you need to study business. It has psychology. And, so they've always tried to move me along those paths, especially as immigrant parents. But the thing that I'll say is, and I say this often, is that there is freedom to structure. So what I'll say is I'm able to be this fluid because I understand what maybe the top three. Again, it kind of goes back to values, what my values are and what I need in my next role to be able to have that flexibility. So for example, I would never take a job, let's say now, that's unpaid, but is like the most awesome, fun experience, like go be a salsa dancer for free in the park. I would love to do that, but if it's for free, I can't. So I do think that there has to be, I've always put in place some structure for myself so that if I hit these 2 or 3 things in the role or in my company, I can play. And it's taken me a long time to get to that point. It's, in my earlier days, especially leaving college, that's not how I thought. But then I realized I just ended up in positions that were really stressful, or, I just didn't enjoy, or I was there for the money. And I was like, okay, so like, what's the point? So I do think that with freedom has to come. It does have to be paired with structure for me, at least, to be able to work in that way. And I think for many people, that might be a stressful approach to life, but I think it's actually made me have so much more fun. I'm enjoying what I'm doing. Of course, I'm so stressed a lot of times as well, especially as a business owner, but it's kind of a fusion of me plus what the outside world is telling me. So it is a conversation. So what that means is, for example, I'm constantly looking at my business data. I'm constantly looking at the industry. So it's a two-way street. It's not just me going and, taking the world by storm. I have to listen as well. So yeah, I always look at it as a conversation.
I really like the way you talked about that, because it struck me. It's the same as if you talk to creative people,
Yeah.
artists or whatever, they need some form of constraint in order for that to work. And that might be a financial constraint or a physical constraint or raw materials, if you're not, whatever it is, right, that constrains your thing in order to be creative. Because if you just literally gave people all the money in the world, right, you can't do it. And I think there's something interesting about what you're doing in many respects is creative, because you're going with the flow and you're following your passions and interests. But to your point, the only way that works and doesn't become a sort of almost like a bewildering choice of options,
Yeah.
or like how could you possibly pick A versus B versus C? You need those particular constraints. And so I really like that idea around, actually, this is very flexible career planning and life planning, I guess, to an extent. But in order for that to work, we need to have those other forms of constraints, I guess, to make it manageable.
Yeah, definitely. I like that too, actually. And I think it's a good example of creatives as well. I never really look at myself as a creative, although some people do tell me that. But I think that's true. And also, it doesn't always work. Also have to be honest in saying I have no idea what I'm doing like 60% of the time. I'm like, it's some structure that I put in place. But I think the acceptance of being okay with it potentially not working actually makes me excited to constantly find solutions that do work. So I don't want it to sound like everything is figured out. I have my life planned. Absolutely not. That's not the case. But I do think there's this constant battle with myself. It's like a challenge, not a battle, but to just find what does work. I think that keeps me moving and finding the solutions.
And I love that permission to fail
Oh
thing,
yeah.
because I think that's super interesting. And one of the other things I've realized in the conversations you and I have is this kind of like, sometimes you just have to do things that make no sense. That's almost like, I don't even know what this is, right? But the only way I'm going to find out is to go for it. And
Yeah.
of course, you don't place your entire kind of personal wealth or well-being or whatever. Not all of those eggs are in that basket.
Right.
But I think there's something interesting about a kind of venture capital approach to our own thing, right? Which is, they wouldn't invest in one thing. They spread the risk across various projects.
Yeah.
And have a portfolio. And I think there's something interesting in the way that you talk about stuff, which is what you're about in the loosest possible sense.
Yeah.
And we're just gonna have lots of things on the go, and we'll try various things out. They're not all going to work out, because I think one of the narratives that often comes in the corporate world, but we also see it on this kind of like music shows where you get people that can't sing, who are just
Oh
deluded
yeah.
and think they
Breaks
can,
my heart.
and they've literally placed everything on this, right? This is their hopes and dreams. And I kind of think that's bad parenting, whoever's put them in that position, because you want to back let people have a go at stuff, right? It's fine. And like, but don't kind of pin all your hopes and dreams, particularly if you don't have the talent for it. And I think what's interesting about what you and I do, sometimes I don't know if I have the talent. The only way, or even not even the remotest aptitude for it, but the only way I'm going to find out is to try that.
Yeah.
And so I love this. Is it fair to describe some of what you do as it's almost childlike in the best possible sense of just like, let's just see what happens.
Mm. Yeah. I guess so. Is that childlike? Or are people just
Well,
adulting too hard? I don't know. I don't know if that's a kid thing as much as sort of, and I think you said it, it's sort of an acceptance of all pieces of what you're doing. I very well go into this, and I'm curious to hear your perspective, knowing that what I've done might fail. And that does, and when it does, and it feels embarrassing still. And it feels public, because I run a community. I'm often asking people to collaborate. And when it doesn't work, those people also know. I think it's less of a child. Actually, I would argue it's actually more of a mature approach to business, because I'm okay knowing and being public with the fact that it doesn't work, and it's not a reflection of me. It's actually something that doesn't work is a success in risk taking. And that for me is actually, that's takes a lot of guts to do that. And I think in the early days, I'd be really embarrassed or be really shy about trying to test things and do things and bring people in and say, I don't know what I'm doing, but can you help me? But now, I actually, it's taken a lot of work on myself, especially as a founder who has gone through some really rough patches, to just say, I am not my business and what I'm doing is not particularly me. So I would actually argue that, yeah, maybe you can look at it as childish, but I actually look at it as mature in some senses.
Yeah, I guess I was looking at it from the kids' perspective of like kids play, they try something out, right? They
Yeah.
play and they might have an argument or they might cry at the end of the day, right? But you come back to play another day.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and so there's a willingness to sort of just experiment with things and throw, kids are allowed to dream and kind of play and like have all sorts of wonderful fantasies about things and test things out and do things that are seemingly illogical and silly. And we let them. And so
Yeah.
where I was going with the childlike thing is that it's like you're not like it's okay. Like if it doesn't work out, it doesn't matter, right? It's just beauty. We've just given it a go. We've learned something. That tomorrow's another day, right? We just got to move on.
Yeah.
But I take your point entirely. I think it's there is something interesting there about the narrative of failure and corporates are not allowed to fail. And I find that, interestingly for me, if I look at, maybe this is back to your tech point, if I look at some of Amazon, thousands, if not millions of failures, but some really real, we can talk about the ethics of the organization, that sort of thing, but huge successes that were based on just like, let's have a go, see what happens with this thing. And he can afford to do that because he controls that business and he's got the scale to be able to do it. And they can afford screw ups.
Right.
And what I think is interesting is that the natural tendency I've seen of certain people that work for themselves is to be, well, I can't do that because this is me. This is my career. This is me. I'm putting
Yeah.
everything on. Maybe I'm putting a ton of money, a ton of time. This has to work. And I think that's really dangerous. And what I love about the spirit of what you're saying is to kind of embrace that and go, it isn't all going to work, right? And I'm going to have misjudged some things badly. And actually, I'm going to
Yeah.
have made some great calls, but the world has moved on and I have missed something
Yeah.
in my analysis.
Oh, yeah.
Or actually, and I love the bit you said about just because I want it doesn't mean everybody else does.
Oh my
And I
gosh.
think that's another interesting trait of like, I'm going to, it's a risk, I guess, of the irritation factor. Because if you start from the thing, right, what pisses me off? And you go, I will fix that problem. And you go, great, that might fix it for me, right? But is anybody else here? Is it? And there probably isn't somebody that cares about it that passionately. So by default, almost this model of I'm chasing down things that annoy me. Well, kind of if they annoyed loads of other people, somebody would probably have done something about it already.
Yeah.
And so there's an interesting thing of having to pivot away from that slightly to make it commercial. And on the way to doing that, there's going to be all sorts of problems. So I think it's really refreshing the way you talk about that.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of good points. And I think there was one that I wanted to address too around adults not being as childlike. I love the way that you compared it to kids being able to do it without repercussions. It's almost like it is assumed that a kid should do that, and then we'll let them go forth and be free. And I'm curious from you because you've had conversations with a lot of really interesting people, and obviously you yourself run a business. Why do you think adults don't do that as much? Or do you think they do?
This is where, for me, the working for yourself thing, where the difference between work me and personal me,
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time working out that the best way to run my business is to align those two things as closely as possible.
Ah,
Right.
yeah.
So that it's authentic to me because I don't want to, I spent a lot of time in the corporate world kind of, I don't know, not dumbing down's the wrong word, but like not being me, acting a little bit, right? Not sort of turning up and conforming at times when, and I get that you can't have everybody in a corporate organization do what the hell they want. I understand that, but there's a point where I'm not going to call something out because it could be problematic if I do, or I'm not going to ask a question that I genuinely want the answer to. I think is a relevant question because I don't know, I might be made to look silly or there's some extra work coming or something, some multitude of reasons why there was a bit of acting involved. And so as I look at these things, I think this alignment of kind of who I am and what I'm about, if I can get that right and my business can be built around the things, and I think that comes back to your values.
Yeah.
Right. It's to say, actually, what are the things that matter to me? And therefore, I got to, if I fuse that into the business, then I'm fusing that into the person. And there's that consistency across the piece. And so I'm very clear that if I do all of those things and I'm honest about my own failings and successes and recognize that, there are certain things that I'm going to get wrong because I do, to your point, I've never done it before.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
I get, probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to, right? I get clients who come to me, ask me to help them solve problems. And I kind of think, why have you come to me? Right? and then I kind of go, okay, well, there's a point here where I've got it. Like if it's, I got approached by like a magazine today to write an article, and I just read it and I went, I have no expertise in that space,
Right.
right? I mean, I could, yeah. So I'm not going to do it, right? Because it would be just implausible, and you might as well get Chat GPT to write the article and do a better job than I will, right? So I won't do that. But I look at it and go, if I have managed to persuade a client, not because I've disingenuously gone out to sell them
Right.
something I can't do,
Right.
but they have in something that I have said or positioned or whatever, typically on social media, they've seen or they've read my book or whatever, and they're kind of going, there is some, we think you can help us.
Mm.
I'm like, well, that's a really good illustration of I should go for this.
Mhm.
And I should pursue this because and we work together, and I'm going to be very honest about what I can and can't do, but
Right.
they've probably seen something that I might not have seen. And maybe just psychologically having me on the team is going to help them, right? Even so, maybe it's just a placebo effect, right? Maybe I don't know. But I think that's kind of interesting. And I've taken me a long time to realize that sort of thinking can get you into trouble in a corporate environment. And so it doesn't bother me now because there's no one's going to tell me off. It's my reputation out there. So to your point, I need to stick to my values. And that's
Mm.
why I wouldn't do something that I was completely I'm not going to suddenly take up brain surgery.
Right.
But I think there's something about we have to conform. It comes back to your point about we have to conform. We have to do things in a certain way, and making mistakes equals you're an idiot, loser, failure, all that kind of negative words. Whereas I think in the environment we're in, well, the other thing is like who defines what my company does? I'm a company of one,
Right.
right? So I can convene a board meeting anytime to discuss a change in
Right.
strategy. And I think, and I look at that and go, I think I should take advantage of that, right? Because if I have those freedoms, what the hell am I doing
Mm.
working in a world where I have those if I am not to some degree taking advantage of them?
Yes. And it is a good distinction, right? It's because we've also built a life where we do have that kind of freedom. Sometimes the freedom is paralyzing. I don't know if you also feel that. I definitely feel that there's
Every single day.
single
Yeah,
day,
yeah. That's something not all day, right?
at
But
least
at some
twice a
point in
day.
the day,
Yes.
yeah. But there's some point I'm going to have doubts,
Yes.
and I think
Yeah.
I need that.
Why?
Well, because I'm not necessarily saying I need it every single day, but I
Right.
think if you don't have that sensation, I always imagine what it must feel like if you're doing some sort of dangerous extreme sport, right? Mountaineering or kind of whatever, right? That you probably, the part of the reason you're doing, I guess I used to ride motorbikes, right? So,
Yeah.
so that kind of, I don't mean near death experiences, but I mean feel alive a little bit, right? And feel a bit vulnerable.
Yeah.
And because I think otherwise it's sort of, I would feel like I'm not pushing myself. I would feel like there wasn't enough at stake here. And so to a certain extent, I don't want them all the time and I need to sometimes shut them out, but I think they fulfill a valuable function.
Yeah. Sort of fight or flight, I would say. No, I think that's interesting. And I do the point that you said about acting resonates with me a lot. And I think I still do that sometimes. But I think particularly in corporate, to your point, it's sort of like there's so many parameters that we have to sort of like be between or live on. And you have bosses and you have people and you're being judged, or we feel like we're being judged and all that kind of stuff. But as companies of one, I'm also a company of one full-time person, but I have freelancers. I also do feel almost, to your point, that freedom is a luxury. And I do often try to tell myself, I don't have to do this. I get to do this. And that puts me in the mindset of what would I do now that I'm remembering how much freedom I have? What do I want to do with it? And I think I often have to remind myself how much freedom I have because we could go in so many directions. Of course, as we said, it can be paralyzing. But it also, if taken the right way, can help us act like kids in the best of ways, right? Like you just put a Band-Aid on it and you get back up and then you ride down the same hill again. Maybe the third time you won't ride down it, but you have that Band-Aid still. And I do think just remembering the beauty of the freedom versus the terror of the freedom will help. It just helps us create in a more enjoyable place, for me at least. I don't know if you feel the same, but yeah, freedom is definitely a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it struck me as you were talking there because I was thinking back to if you look at kind of trust fund kids or whatever that have inherited huge amounts of wealth,
Yeah.
where there's no you don't have to do anything, and we've seen the tons of them go off the rails, and so you see the sort of worst side of it where. I think if you don't feel some kind of nervousness about what you're doing and some kind of questioning of
Mm.
yourself, then it's sort of being handed to you on a plate a little bit. And I've had a very privileged upbringing in education, and I'm very conscious that sort of, I never really wanted for anything as I was growing. And I can always point to stuff I wish I'd had, but it's not a very compelling story relative to the other stories that are out there.
Right.
As I look at it, to get the best out of people, there is that element of pressure that needs to be there, because otherwise we kind of coast and we do, we just do the bare minimum that we need to get through life. And I think if everything is handed to you, then there's no sense of achievement. And I think also we don't get the best of ourselves, because if we're just performing in a mediocre way. And I think that was one of the challenges for me, was in the corporate environment, was there were certain things I was asked to do that massively stretched me. And there were certain things that I did no effort at all. And in many cases, there was a disproportionate value placed on one or the other, which meant I was either very successful or very not successful. But well, actually, the stuff that I can just do with my eyes closed, that's not a great place to hang out, right? The comfort zone doesn't deliver. I don't know. I like, if I spend the whole day just doing stuff I've never done before, then that's much more exciting than spending the whole day just repeatedly doing the same tedious tasks I've done a million times I know I can do.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think there's a difference between stretching and growing, for me at least, because there are times when I find myself being stretched, which to me means overworked, overstressed, over all that stuff. That's my definition of it. Versus growing, I sort of, imagine a plant that's being watered and you're getting more nutrients and you're actually becoming bigger and better. And I do find that in moments when I feel like I'm actually stretched, like really tired, doing the same types of tasks, I don't have time, all that. I'm like, I have to get out of that. And I did feel it's a big reason I did leave my corporate jobs, because I felt there was almost no choice in when I stretched and when I grew. As much as I tried to shift and talk to my team and try to shift the product, at the end of the day, it's not yours. And so I think that's one of the beauties of the work that we do, is like, we have the choice of being as much as we can in the growth zone versus the stretch zone, as I call it. And even when talking to my team, I'm making sure they're not being stretched. They feel like they're actually growing. There are moments when we have to stretch and do extra work and all this kind of stuff. But I do think like that point about growth is really important that you mentioned.
I love that.
Yeah.
And that actually takes us on to mental health, which I know is something that you care about.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that and how that ties into your thinking, because I think one of the reasons I think that you can do what you do and the way that you do it is that there is mastery around that subject. And if not mastery, a supreme awareness of the significance and importance of it. Because I think you can't sustain the kind of mentally challenge, because what you and I do is not physically challenging, but it's mentally challenging and draining in a different way. And there's something incredibly unhealthy about staring at screen all day.
Yeah, I was going to say,
it's very, very unnatural. So I'm fascinated by how you see that and how you embed that in what you do, because I think it's an underrated piece of success. Because often what people do is it sort of becomes I'm burning out, I better do something about it, or kind of I've been told I need to do something about it. But for me, it's a core component of the successes that I have are often when I've borne that in mind. And I'm fascinated by how you see that.
Yeah, definitely. I think the reason I became so aware of it is because I was at that point of extreme burnout. And actually, it was in my corporate jobs when I started experiencing symptoms that I just didn't know what was happening. I lived in New York City at the time. And it was in a moment, it was actually when I was at my Built by Girls Verizon media job, and we were running this pitch competition with Michelle Obama. I think at the time I was maybe 24 or 25, I don't know, And so I was just saying yes to everything. I was taking the lead on that. I was saying yes, 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 yes. And I wanted to be in that growth zone. Like we were just talking, I wanted to grow. I wanted to do it. This is so cool. In my head, I have to do everything. And then there was moments where I would get on the subway and I would start to feel claustrophobic. I was like, what's happening? What's going on? I was like, okay, or maybe it was just a freak thing. And then there was one moment when I went to have a drink. I didn't even have the drink and I fainted in a bar. And then there's all these things that happened to me physically that I just didn't understand the mind-body connection at the time. And I think it's nothing, like we never talked about that in school. Definitely my family, they're immigrants from the Middle East. Not something that has ever brought up sort of this concept of mental health. I started getting really bad migraines. So I was starting to have all of these actually physical pieces of pain that were happening to me. And that's when I just started to do my own research. I was like, this is not sustainable. And, it was a big moment when I actually decided to quit and sort of eat, pray, love. I went to, I did my Southeast Asia tour, did all this kind of stuff, but I started to just do my own research around how can I live a more balanced life. And so I'm definitely an avid meditator. I would definitely not say I'm a master in any sense of anything mental health related, because it definitely is a practice. But every single day I do meditate, I do write, I do all of the sort of the traditional, I would say, things that they tell you to do in the textbooks, but I've added my own flair to it. And to your point about sort of the question was around how is that brought into business? I think a big thing, and I'm not sure, Christian, do you meditate? Because I don't want to make assumptions. Do you meditate or do any mindfulness
A
activities?
little
A
bit.
little
I don't.
bit.
It's interesting because I play. I'll talk a little bit
Yeah,
about what I do in a second. But yeah. But I play with that space.
you play with
So
it.
I'm aware of it. But go for it.
Okay. Yeah, I don't want to make assumptions, but I think generally what it has taught me obviously is around mindfulness and taking a beat. I think for the longest time I was really reactive. I would if someone would say yes, I would sort of without thinking or without feeling comfortable taking a breath, just say, just immediately answer. And I think right now it's actually pushed me to be more aware of what I'm actually thinking and pause for a second. And that pause actually brings a lot for me because I'm able to challenge my team. I'm able to challenge myself and say, do you actually want to do that? Is that really what you want to be doing? It also, because now I'm more in tune with my mind body connection, I shut my laptop when I start to feel and so something happening. I go for a walk, I do whatever it is. But I think generally it's a topic that's not talked about enough, especially in founders. And my founder friends and I talk about this all the time, how difficult it really can be, especially as solo founders, which you are as well. It is such a lonely, taxing journey. And it's one where you almost feel like you're constantly questioning. It's a conversation with yourself all the time. I don't know if you feel this, right? I'm like, I'm going crazy. And so it's definitely helped me, I think, just set the stage for myself to say it's okay to stop working. It's okay to take a pause. It's okay to do all these things. But it's something I have to do every day because honestly, this, like you said, this work is another level of stress that I actually did not anticipate as a business owner.
Yeah, and so my response to the what do I do thing is I'm fascinated by reading what I should be doing
Okay.
and learning about that
Yeah.
and kind of experiencing it and then going, okay, how do I take that and fit that into the world that I'm in so that it's kind of like I'm borrowing the techniques that work for me.
Yeah.
And I find it really, really interesting that in the same way that I don't want to be working for, like one of the reasons I want to work for myself is I don't want to have somebody standing over my shoulder telling me how to do things.
Yeah.
I want to be able to experiment, try things, screw up, all those sorts of things. And do things with the business that probably might feel financially stupid, but they feel like the right place. I mean, I wouldn't put the whole business at risk, but you know what I mean? Let's just try that. Let's gamble on that. Let's spend some time doing that.
Yeah.
And I think the same way with the mental health stuff. It's kind of like, where can I get that sense? So I want to go and experience what that is delivered through meditation or delivered through yoga or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I go, well, does that work for me? And I'm not just going to do something because that's what you're supposed to do. So for me, meditation is an interesting one. So I spend a lot of time traveling by train, right? I spend half my time in London, half my time in Munich, which is a long time on the train. And I've realized that one of the things I love about the train is just sitting there in the carriage, staring out of the window
Yes.
at beautiful scenery and just letting the mind wander. And it's a weird thing because it's unusual in the sense that there is no other context, I've realized, in which you could do that without being in danger, right? Because you can't drive a car and just stare out the window and not think. You can't cycle.
Yeah.
Walking doesn't deliver the same pace of change. And so an airplane's obviously looking mostly at clouds, right?
Right.
So I just thought this is really, I guess I could do it in the back of a car, but that requires effort to organize. Whereas this, I can just sit myself down in an incredibly comfortable seat and
Right.
someone will bring me coffee, all that kind of stuff, right? But I've realized that is a heavily meditative environment
Yeah.
for the bits that I want it to be. Now, nobody would say sitting in a railway carriage staring out the window is meditate. I mean, it's lunatic, right? What do you mean you're wasting your time doing that? And I go, I don't care. My boss, i.e. me, tells me it's okay.
Yeah.
And so that's a good example, I think, of me going, I recognize the importance of having time to do nothing, right? And to think nothing and to spend time contemplating stuff that might in the moment feel like the biggest waste of time ever because nothing is, maybe I come away from my staring out the window and the world's got more complicated, right? Because a million other ideas have occurred to me.
Right.
But sometimes it's just the way you process stuff and really positive solutions will occur to me. Or like a couple of weeks down the line, something that I was starting to think suddenly makes sense. And
Yeah.
I kind of go, that's a process that works for me. And so I think, to your point around how do I do it? I'm not a fan of prescriptive solutions to these things.
Right.
Kind of like and sometimes I love the way you talk as well, because it's like you can't diarize when you're going to be feeling a bit stressed, right? It's predictable to an extent, right? If you've got there are lots of activities that may lead to a degree, but I don't know the inbound inquiries I've got and the stuff that I've got going on and blah, blah, all that kind of, you just don't know when that moment's going to come. And so
Yeah.
for me, it's also about diarizing time where I go, I'm not going to fill every single minute
Oh,
or
yeah.
second of my day with something. There's just going to be time that's blocked out for come what may. And that might be time where I'm in the flow and I can really work productively. It might be time where I go, right, I just needed that breather to make sure that I can get out the door. Or I've got the gap in the diary. So if I need to shunt things around, I can then, if I need to pull my going outside, getting some fresh air, going for a bike ride, whatever, pull that early, I can do that.
Yeah.
Because I think that's much more natural. I think one of the things when I was in the corporate world, it was like back-to-back meetings.
Oh, no.
Because meetings is where you work, right? God forbid that you sit on your own doing nothing, because that would be unproductive
Yeah.
time. Whereas in my head, it's almost the opposite, right? Like anytime I'm in a meeting, I've got to really know why I'm there.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm trying to turn this, I think for me, some of it is back to your original point. Some of it is like thinking, okay, I don't have to accept conventional wisdom on a lot of things, but what I have to recognize is that some people will have solved some problems before that may be helpful to me to inform how I solve my own problems. And so let's be inspired by them, either as brilliant ideas to be borrowed from or appalling ideas never to be copied again.
Yeah.
And I think that applies as much to mental health or how I run my life as it does to the business decisions I make for the company.
100%. And what you described actually is exactly meditation. I know you're saying some people might say it's a waste of time. You are literally focusing on something and watching it or listening to it or going with it. That's all it is. And meditation is not the answer for everybody. In fact, for example, I'm on a salsa dancing team in Boston now, and I find that to be my greatest meditation because I literally am not looking at the computer. I can't see anything come in. Similar to what you're saying about the train. But interestingly, what it's also, when I'm really focused, I see, for example, the way the team solves problems, the way my studio is running the business, and there's just a lot of things that have come out of it that to me, would I call it traditional meditation? No, it's not meditation, but it's a big piece of my mental health in terms of maintaining a balance in my life. And inevitably, if I get business ideas or if I have aha moments or whatever it is, then it happens. That's not the point. And I think especially, corporate America founders, whatever it is, we always have the perils of productivity. And I really, really, really hate it. And in fact, I do the best I can to pay attention to when I feel like I'm being productive and when I actually am. To your point about meetings, I don't know if you also do this, but like my Calendly or my scheduling system caps the number of meetings I take a day. Yeah, you do that too. I'm like, why do I need more than 3? I don't need more than 3 meetings. I very rarely take things outside of that. I don't take meetings Mondays and Fridays unless it's with my core team. I think we also have to be protective of our time and not apologize for that. I don't work weekends. I don't work nights. If I'm working nights, that means that I'm doing a poor job as a leader and getting my team on board with their deadlines. And so, I just don't think that has to be it. And as a founder, I've actually never done that. And I promised myself that when I started my business, I would start it with balance and I would maintain it with balance. And so I think actually the biggest piece of mental health is just actually being mindful of what's going on. I often think we let the world happen to us. And then you're like, oh man, I'm so stressed. And of course that happens. But it's like, okay, so what are you gonna do about it? Are you gonna, score the number of meetings you have? There's a lot of solutions to it. I don't think time has to be used all the time. I think that actually should be a sin. I think like go where you need it, get your priorities done, and then just go on a train or sit in the back of an Uber and look out the window. I don't know.
Right.
There's no reason to have to do something.
As you were talking there, I was thinking the fascinating thing is when you start to look at some of these digital tools like Calendly, for example, it forces you. You could either just go with the default settings, but actually I looked at it and I went, well, what does matter to me, right? How many meetings do I want to have? Like, what break do I want to have between them?
True.
I had it with the podcast actually, which I use bookings through that. And it was like, I hadn't looked at the podcast settings. I was just like, I will make myself as freely available. And there was one day where I had like 4 back to back. Now, 1 is exhausting. 2 is like the limit. 3, and 4, like that's not a good use of anyone. Very efficient from an economic perspective, right? Very inefficient from a like getting the best. I mean, what's the point of the show? Well, the answer is if I'm half asleep or like zoning, this is not going to make a great episode. And so what I thought was interesting was actually I then went in and was like, I need to think about this. And it's really interesting because the defaults that we take from either the ones that the software gives us or from the world that we've come from is kind of like, well, working hours need to be this and you need to make blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I can now think about and say, and I can tweak it, right? So I can decide that maybe the answer is, 3 meetings a day. Actually, maybe a certain time, maybe I don't know, maybe I'll shift it around. One day I'll do 5 and then the next day I'll do nothing, whatever, right? I can play with that. And I think there's something really interesting about bringing entrepreneurial spirit into how so workflows. And I don't mean corporate like billing cycles or anything. I literally just mean the way that I show up and working out what gets the best out of me.
Yes.
And that's quite
Yeah.
stressful because sometimes I've made calls where it's kind of like, I think in the old days, I remember when I used to work in banking, it was like, I need to go to Zurich. I will fly to Zurich for the day because that's what people do. Right.
Right.
And then I just thought back on the other day, I was like, I don't do that anymore. I'm not going to fly to a single city for one day and return it was
Right.
insane, right? You get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, you catch some right, and you're just exhausted the whole day, and then you get back at midnight, right? What this is dumb,
Yeah.
right? Why not? So there's those sorts of old habits that I thought was kind of macho. It's cost effective because you don't have to pay for a hotel. It's idiotic, right? It doesn't get the best out of you. But I'm loving playing with some of that stuff, and I think for me, that's where the link between the mental health and the business and whatever, because you can. I'm not saying to your point, you can't control every moment of every single day, and there are going to be crises and stuff doesn't work out, whatever. But you can provide a backdrop and a rhythm that can sort of cope with that. And I think a lot of that is recognizing what works for you and personalizing it and being honest about those things. And so I love, a lot in the way you talk about things is this honesty about who you are and what you're about.
Yeah.
We can call it authenticity, we can call it whatever. But I think that if you then bring that into how you work, then suddenly that starts to become interesting because your life is moving to a rhythm that works for you.
I like this concept of a rhythm. I think the hardest part about being on beat, if we're continuing with this rhythm analogy, is accepting the fact that your rhythm doesn't particularly mean anything. I had this inkling, for example, if I don't take meetings Mondays and Fridays, people are going to see me as an unproductive business owner, or all of these sort of like all of these whispers of like, are you doing your job? Is this enough? Is it whatever? And I'm like, sometimes obviously you have to, again, it's not just about me, it's about whoever's taking the calls and all that kind of stuff. But when I put the strictest parameters in place to start, and I told myself I will loosen them if I need. My strictest parameters have remained for the past 5 years, and people have found a way to work around them, right? My meetings only within a certain block, my meetings on certain days or whatever it is. And so I think that was actually one of the hardest pieces for me, especially transitioning from corporate to being a business owner, was that it's like, is this enough question all the time? Is it enough hours? Is this okay to only have 3 meetings? And I don't know if you had these questions, but that's what drove me the most insane.
Yeah.
It's not anyone's fault that I have 5 meetings on the calendar except mine. And I forget
Right, because no one's forcing you to have it.
And they don't know how many other meetings I have. They can't see. They're like, oh, Christian has 3 other podcasts recording. He must be an awesome host. They're like, no, only we are the ones seeing that. So it's almost like, to your point about the authenticity, it's almost like actually not caring. I don't love the word unapologetic because but there's something to actually just looking at it for what it is and not making assumptions around it. Like, X number of meetings does not mean X% of productivity. And I think I had to graduate from that corporate to founder life of like, I'm allowed to set the stage for myself. And if it doesn't work, I change it and you shift it again. But I think that was one of the hardest pieces for me. And I don't know if you felt the same, where it's like, you going on your own rhythm is fine. And if you only like to take meetings from like 7 to 9 p.m. your time, maybe that might be hard, but it's good you're paying attention to what works for you, when your creative flow is, all that kind of stuff. So I think that was actually one of the hardest pieces.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I still think about it all
Me
the
too.
time. And like, have I got it right? Have I
Oh,
opted?
yeah.
But I think there's something really interesting there about what you were saying about other people's perceptions.
Oh, yeah.
And this idea that sort of you're lazy or whatever. And I realized there's a flip side to that, right? Which is, if you imagine you present a Calendly to a client that is like, you have nothing going on, right? There's tons of availability. Well, that doesn't sound like a premium product, right? That sounds like a product no one is using.
Right.
And so there was a bit of me that just went, I've got to be slightly careful here. And that it doesn't look like I'm sort of freely available to anyone, because sure, if you were offering a kind of personal assistant service to, I don't know, to the rich and famous, right? Then you would say, well, I expect you to be available 24/7. You would charge a premium rate for doing that. But given what we do, right, it's cognitive skills, and actually people want to get the best out of the conversations with me. To have a diary that sort of looks like I'm not doing anything else, and I is not helpful. And so I think there's a balance. You don't want to not be, I can only do 10 o'clock on a Friday or nothing else, right? That's not helpful.
Right.
But I think there's a point where you should start and set some parameters and try and bend and flex a little bit. But I started to think about perception in all sorts of ways and say, actually, perception can play both ways. And I think a lot of what I've been trying to do as well is to show people my inner workings. So often you get sort of, there's the risk of you pay me for a particular thing and people just go, oh, yes, they might sort of go, oh, that wasn't what I was expecting to pay. And sometimes it's too cheap, sometimes it's too expensive. It's like you can never win with these things.
Yeah.
But there's a point where,
Yeah.
in order to get me on form to be able to work with you, whether that's doing a keynote, whether that's doing a workshop, whether that's just working, whatever it is, right? If you want those sessions with me, then for those to be successful, I need to have my mental health time. I need to have my time doing research. I need to have my time doing whatever, right?
Yeah.
That's all factored into that thing. And that's how you get, I can spend a load of time doing things your employees can't, right? So that might involve me watching, yeah, it sounds great, right? I might spend the whole day on YouTube watching really interesting videos that are super important as part of my research, reading books,
Yeah.
whatever. Maybe I can sit outside all day reading books for one day of the week.
Yep.
Right. But that's what gives me that extra thing that your employees won't have because you don't let them do that. Right. And that's why I can add value in your thing.
Right.
And so I've been really trying to talk to people and sort of go, it's all part of the same thing. If ultimately you are buying a human being and their insights and their outputs, then you kind of want back to your point is you want I was about to say well-tended vegetable. That's a terrible word. A well-tended plant.
It can be a vegetable
yeah,
if you want. Yeah.
right, whatever, right? But you wouldn't want to bring in something that wasn't healthy because you're not going to
Yeah.
get the best version of me. And I think back to the number of times as an employee, it was kind of like, let's do an all-nighter because that's really like, what the hell? That's the most, like, why are we doing this? Like, this
Right.
is dumb.
Right.
You're paying a ton of money for this human capital, and then you're going to basically put it in a position where it's not capable of thinking straight, it's highly likely to make mistakes. And you think that's a good idea?
Yes.
It's mad.
It's a depletion, and we never function well out of a point of depletion. Yeah. No, I mean, it is mad. I totally agree with you, and I'm on board with balance, and I'm happy to hear you are too, and sort of like the perception on both ends. And I always just keep thinking too, to your point about you reading for one day of the week or whatever it is like, again, your client doesn't know that's happening. They just know what your output is, and so that's enough validation if they're happy with your work. Keep doing what you're doing, right? And if not, then shift it.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not all directly. I think back to your point as well. When I look at what's valuable output, there is back to failures. There is a ton of time I spend doing things that achieve nothing.
Mm.
Right. I'll be reading things that are completely like won't get me any
Yeah.
further, or start thoughts that never quite. Maybe they'll finish in 6 months' time. Maybe they'll never get finished. Maybe they're not worth finishing. But there's a lot of wasted time in terms of those things. But that's fine. That's part of the process because I can't. If I could predict which books to read or research or thoughts to have early on, I'd be having them.
Yep.
I have to go through those processes, and I think it's the same as R&D for the physical world. We have to kind of do some R&D in our brains and allow ourselves to spend some time that's not productive. And whether that's we set out for it not to be productive, or it turns out that it is not productive because actually, I don't know, I thought this is going to be interesting, but it's really not. Of course, I got to be careful, right? I don't finish a book just because I start a book doesn't mean I finish it, right? So if I
Right.
start it and I go, this is a waste of my time, I will not
Right. Why would you?
and finish it.
Yeah.
But that might be wasted time, or it might not. I don't know. And I think that for me, that's an interesting thing is recognizing that that's part of who we are, and that we're not going to be efficient machines producing all the time.
But then I would argue it's not wasted. This is the thing is sort of like these labels of productive versus unproductive, wasted versus not wasted. To me, productivity just means that you're doing your best to get towards a certain goal. So I would never assume that you're just going to do something to waste a client's dime, let's call it, right? So if the intention is there, I always operate from the place of intention. If the intention is there, then it is productive. I know we're associating it with like, did I bang out a 10-page proposal after this 1 hour? That I guess we could call that productive, but it's a question of like, is that wasted time then? It's actually just, it goes back to play. We're just playing because we think that this is going to get us to the next best thing. And I don't think that's a waste. I actually think that's what we just have to do. To get to your point, R&D, would we consider R&D a waste of time? Never. But because we are doing it, we think, oh my God, like that YouTube video. Then I watch, like an Usher replay from the Grammys, maybe by accident in between, so it just happens sometimes, but it's not a waste because the intention is good.
I love that. Danielle, I think I could keep talking to you forever.
Same.
And we will keep having conversations.
We will.
But before I let you go, remind people, if they want to find out more about you, about Badassery, how do they do that?
Good question. So Badassery would be badassery-hq.com. That's our website. I do have a profile on there, but I'm mostly on LinkedIn. So just look me up, Danielle Letayf.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Listen, thank you so much for your time. I've loved it. I didn't know where the conversation was
Me
going to
neither.
go. But it's been an absolute pleasure. I look forward to many more of them, both recorded and not recorded. But thank you so much. One, I thank you for the Badassery. It's great, by the way. I love it. It comes highly recommended.
Awesome.
But more importantly, thank you for being a fabulous guest on the show and entering into the spirit of just having a free conversation.
Oh, thanks for letting me be a kid, Christian. This was super fun. I appreciate it.
So that's it for this episode of the show. My enormous thanks to you for listening and to Danielle for appearing. To find out more about Danielle and her membership community Badassery, have a look in the show notes. There are links to those there. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk podcast, welcome. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major platforms. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving us a review. It really does help others discover the show. You can do that wherever you download it. To discover episodes of the show that you might have missed, visit the website humanriskpodcast.com. I will be back very soon with another episode of this show, but in the meantime, stay safe. Try engaging in respectful debate with someone who holds a different perspective from you. You never know. You might learn something. And thank you so much for listening.